We're continuing this morning in our sermon series on the search for happiness. And if you recall, the reason that we got onto this topic was we had previously covered the idea of living in the covenant. And really we saw that our lives are full of covenants. They're kind of everywhere that we turn. Obviously, the foundational covenant we have is with God and Jesus Christ. But there's covenants everywhere in our lives. Now, the problem is that most of the time, we have a hard time being happy in covenants. They're necessary for our lives. You can't live without them. You can't avoid them. The problem is that most of the time, they make us unhappy. And so we're talking about, through this sermon series, and today, we're talking about how do you experience these covenants with joy? The foundational one, obviously, is your covenant with Jesus Christ. And if you can be joyful in that covenant, that's going to go a long ways to helping you in all the other covenants that you experience. But we want to understand how to do this. And we're going to be talking today about rebellion. Now, this is kind of the heart of the matter here. When you're in a covenant and you're not happy, you can be sure that you're in the midst of rebellion. Now, this is kind of an important thing to understand, because what I'm saying here is that as a Christian, if you're not experiencing joy, there's some kind of rebellion going on in your life. I know that's a lot to say, and I know that there might be pushback against it. But the issue is that the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of a life united to God in the Spirit, one of those fruits is joy. If you're living as a Christian and you're not full of joy, you're not full of happiness, you're not experiencing that, you can be sure that somewhere in your life there's an issue of rebellion going on that needs to be addressed. And so we're going to talk today about this idea of rebellion, and we're going to look at it in the course of kind of one of the earliest chapters of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 4. We're going to be talking about Cain and Abel, and this is really a great encapsulation of a lot of this issues of rebellion that we find living in covenants. Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, it says, "In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it.'" Now, there's a lot of things happening in this passage that are really important for us as we look at how to live our lives in the covenant with God that we have in a way that's joyful, but also in all the other covenants of our lives, because you find yourself in covenants all over the place. Anytime you represent somebody and they represent you, you're in a covenant. That's because there's a unity of identity there, right? So if you can say I'm an American and America is me, that's covenant, right? Are you an American? Yes. Well, what is America? You could say, well, America is the geography of the United States, but we know that's not really true, right? Because obviously, in World War II, when the Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands, we didn't say, wow, they're Americans now, right? Just because they'd come there. That's not what it is. There's an identity there. It's people, right? America is the people. And so you are America, and America is you. So you have a nation, you have a state, you have a community, you have a church, you have a place that you work, you have a family. All these are little covenants. The idea behind these covenants is that they are to be microcosms of the covenant that we have with God in Jesus Christ, and you experience these all the time. And when you're in these covenants and you're not experiencing joy, there's something wrong there. Now, I'm not saying that every time the other side of the covenant is always perfect and right. I'm saying that when you're in the covenant and there's no joy, there's a problem. So let's look at what's happening here in our text, and let's ask ourselves a few questions. And I think these are questions that kind of occur to us or occur to people who are unfamiliar with the gospel and unfamiliar with the Bible. And I think that it's important for us to ask those questions, even if maybe we understand the answers. The question is, can we understand the question? What I mean by that is, How many of you guys have been a Christian for more than 20 years? Raise your hand if you've been a Christian for more than 20 years. Okay, it's the vast majority of us. Sometimes it's hard to remember what it's like not to be a Christian. I mean, there's a blessing in that, right? There's a blessing in the fact that you've been living in this new identity for so long that it's so second nature to you that you've forgotten what it's like to live outside of it. But we need to remember, because you encounter people all the time who aren't Christians. And so it's good, even if you know the answer, to know the question, to understand what is it about the Christian life that appears strange or odd or perplexing to somebody who's not part of it. And sometimes in exploring those answers, what we find is we find new truths that were kind of hidden from us. So the first question that we're going to ask today is, why is God so concerned about rules? Like the interesting thing about God is that he's concerned about sin. And when you talk to people who aren't Christians, a lot of times they'll say, I don't understand why God is so hung up on these rules. Like they talk about the wages of sin being death. You talk about that to people and they're like, that seems a little harsh. You know, when I break the rules at work, you know, maybe I get talked to. But when I break the rules with God, I'm dead. That seems a little bit much. So we want to ask, why is God so concerned about rules? Number two, why is faith necessary? That's one of the strangest things that I find that talking to people that they have trouble with is, why is faith a necessary part of this? Why can't God just save me? And the third thing that we want to talk about here is, how is sin's desires, how is it contrary to me? Because that's in the bottom of our text here. Did you guys catch that? If you do well, verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. The reason, and this is just kind of shorthand, how is its desire contrary to me? The biggest question that people have, I find, about sin is, how can sin really be bad for me when I enjoy it so much? Have you guys ever experienced talking to somebody like that? They have no conception of, well, I really love this. How can it be bad for me? So we want to look at those things today. So let's start with the first one. Why is God so concerned about the rules? I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoy watching The Office. And when Michael Scott, it went off Netflix, and it was a tragedy. And I just can't bear to get another subscription to anything else. So right now I am officeless. But remember when Michael Scott, he's lost some accounts and he wants to go fix them, and he's letting the GPS navigate for him, and it tells him to turn into a lake. You guys remember that? And Dwight's with him, and Dwight says, there's a lake, stop. And he's like, no, it's telling me to turn. And he uses this as why technology is bad, and all that stuff goes on. The problem that we experience a lot of times in our own lives, but also in talking to people who aren't Christians, is following the Bible to them is like Michael Scott listening to the GPS, right? In their minds, this is kind of old. This is an old book that's telling me what to do, but right in front of me, I see life looks different than what this book is telling me to do. And if I follow this book, I'm gonna drive into a lake. That's kind of how they view it. Why should I listen to the instructions of this when with my own eyes and with my own mind I can see how to navigate life and I can see how to experience life? And this book seems to be telling me everything not to do when everything that I see says, no, you should do it. Why is God so concerned about these rules? They don't make any sense. They don't lead to a good life in most people's minds. They don't make for a desirable outcome. What we first have to understand is, and it's really brought forward in this passage, is that we should not really think of sin in totality as an issue with rules. We should think about it as an issue with relationships. Really what's happening here, the problem is not that Cain's not following the rules correctly. The problem is that Cain's not dealing with his relationships correctly. And the thing is, if you reframe in your mind this idea of sin from a list of keeping rules to a list of having right relationships, then you're going to experience the Bible in a different way, and you're going to see that God actually has a lot of points in his favor in the things that he says. So think about it this way. Remember, Cain doesn't bring the right sacrifice, and the Bible doesn't tell us what's wrong with it exactly. Now, there are some differences in the descriptions of what was brought. If you go back, it says, in verse 3, it says, in the course of time, Cain brought the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. First, notice that Cain is the first one bringing the offering, and he's bringing it of the fruit of the ground. And it says Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. Now, a lot of times theologians and people will say, well, the difference between Cain's offering and Abel's offering is Cain brought some of his produce from the ground, but Abel brought the firstborn and the fat portions. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we should note that God doesn't bring that up as an issue. Like theologians look at that and they say, well, here's the issue. This is why Cain's was rejected and Abel's wasn't. We should keep that in mind. That's a possibility. But also notice that God doesn't bring that up. God doesn't say to Cain, hey, here's why your offering wasn't rejected. These were the problems with it. Cain it's rejected. Now, here's the thing that's important about that. That actually becomes an incredibly valuable information for us. You won't always know why you're failing. You won't. How many of you guys have experienced failure in your life and you have no idea what happened or why? Like, that's everybody, right? That's life, and at some point that becomes an issue in your relationship to God and in your relationship to the people who aren't experiencing that failure. That becomes a bone of contention. You see, the problem here isn't a list of rules. The problem here is that this failure in Cain's life is affecting his relationship with God, and it's affecting his relationship with his brother. And this is what we should see as the big problem. These issues are upending and destroying the relationships in Cain's life. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 through 26 is an interesting passage because it deals with the very problem that Cain is having. He's angry with his brother. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 through 26, it says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last pennies. Now here's the interesting thing about this passage. It seems like Jesus is multiplying rules, right? We can't murder people. That's one of those rules we have to follow. It's such a hardship. But then Jesus has to come along and make it so much more difficult because now, not only can we not murder our brother, but we can't even be angry with him. Now that's a little bit farther, right? That kind of addresses 90% of the driving that I do. Now all of a sudden that's outside the rules. And the problem is that now it just seems like Jesus is multiplying rules, but notice the language that's there in that passage. Is Jesus multiplying rules? No, he's talking about relationships. First of all, we have somebody who's angry with his brother. It says, if you're offering your gift at the altar there, remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother. He's saying address the relationship between you and your brother. Now, why is he saying that? Because sin, rebellion, the real issue, the issue that underlies all the other issues is the relationship. That's what's at the heart of everything. The rules are there to facilitate the relationship. The rules are there because they manifest relationship. If we miss the problem with relationship, we're missing everything that's important about dealing with sin. You see, the issue here that we have to grasp is that covenants create unity, and covenants create relationship, and covenants create family. Everything that we experience in life, everything that we do, you go to a football game, or I was just talking to somebody before the service, and I was talking about going to movies. And I was talking about, I went to a movie and saw two people almost get in a fight, and they were yelling at each other in the middle of the movie. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm so glad I'm here, paid money for this, rather than sitting at home watching it. And you know what it makes me want to do? It makes me want to not go to movies. Have you guys ever been there? You're at a movie theater and somebody's acting in a way that they shouldn't be. And the thing is, there's a list of rules that come up on the screen before the movie starts. And it was just showing 10 minutes ago, and the people have already forgotten about the rules. But it's not really about the rules, is it? It's about a relationship. And the thing is, you can withdraw from all of these things, but the problem is that we're part of a community. We have to figure out how to make this work. Covenants mean that we represent each other, that we are part of one another, that there's a unity that takes place. I am an Arizonan, and Arizonans are part of who I am. Right? You're part of a community, you're part of a church, you're part of a city. When you're in that theater, you're part of what's going on there. And the interesting thing is when disasters happen, that's when all of a sudden people remember those things. I'm sure you guys have heard stories about what happened on September 11th in 2001 when people were in an elevator with random strangers, and all of a sudden they needed each other to survive, and there's a bond that's formed, there's a recognition. This is not something that's created in that moment. It's something that's recognized in the moment, but needs to be there all the time. When you're in an elevator with people who are fellow Americans or people from your community, there's a unity that should exist there. And the rules to public behavior and all that kind of stuff, it's not, people in our minds, in a lot of people's minds now in today's world, they think, well, I don't want to be constrained by rules. I don't want to do anything that I don't want to do. And they don't understand that those rules are actually, it's not about the rules. It's about the relationships you have with one another and manifesting them in a way that leads to more unity, not more friction. These covenants can be destroyed. And the nature of that destruction is a very interesting thing, and we see it happening here in Genesis chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. I was reading about Benedict Arnold. You guys recognize the name, right? Yeah. It's that drink you get in the morning, right? And Benedict Arnold. Now, Benedict Arnold was that guy. You know that guy, right? He's that American general. And he was actually well thought of. He did a number of things that were very courageous and very intelligent in the Revolutionary War. But he felt like he had been passed over quite a bit, and he had a problem spending money. And he got offered a lot of money to turn over a very important fort that the Americans were holding. And he decided to do it. He was going to be paid like 20,000 pounds, something like that, which at the time was a huge sum. He was going to be paid that to turn over this fort and basically stab everybody that he knew, his countrymen, in the back. He decided to do it, but the plot was uncovered when the guy who's his liaison to the English got captured, and on his person were documents implicating Benedict Arnold. He had to flee, and he ended up becoming a British general, and in some of the actions that he took as a British general, there was a great massacre of men who surrendered under his leadership. Obviously, the British lost the war. He went to live in Britain, but nobody there really cared for him too much. He went to Canada and tried to make his fortune there, but people there were even less fond of him. And so he ended up moving back to Great Britain, where he spent the rest of his life. But after his switch, he really wasn't a person that was welcomed anywhere. Why? Because people felt like they couldn't trust him. Benedict Arnold had a number of grievances. He felt like he wasn't promoted the same way everybody else was. He felt like he wasn't recognized. He felt like people took advantage of him and took credit for his exploits. He had a number of grievances. You know, the fascinating thing is that this is what begins the destruction of covenant. It's really important for us to understand that this is what begins the destruction of covenant. When you say, that guy took my credit, you're distinguishing yourself from them. He didn't say, hey, the American army did this. No, he said, I did this, and that other guy took the credit. You know what he's doing? He's not seeing himself as a unified whole in the group. He's saying, well, there's a distinction here between that guy and me. Yeah, we're both in the Continental Army. We're both in the American Army. We're both trying to win the same battle. We both, he's not saying that. He's saying, look, there's a distinction here between me and you, and I'm being aggrieved. What happens with Cain's life? The same thing. He's not joyful that the family has brought a good offering before God. He's angry that he hasn't been recognized the way he wanted to be recognized. When you break covenants, or when this kind of destruction starts to take hold in the covenant, it destroys the very essence of what makes you brothers. What is the thing that makes you brother? What's the thing that made Benedict Arnold and the other men that he was fighting with? What made them a unified whole? What made them brothers in arms? What makes you united to your community? What makes you united to your family or to your church? There's a spirit that's there. And the very beginnings of the destruction contain the seeds of the unraveling of that spirit. What I mean by that is this. Let's say this. You say part of what it means to be in our family is that we tell the truth. Part of what it means to be in our family is that we love one another. Part of what it means to be in our family is that we're for one another. You know, when you start thinking negative thoughts about the other people in your family, you are not just destroying that other person. You're actually destroying that very bond that brings you together and makes you a family. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? There's a glue there, and you're attacking that glue. In Israel's own history, there was a problem, and the problem was that David had united the country. He experienced civil war. He was able to unite the country. There was some civil war kind of going on during his reign because one of his sons kind of led a rebellion. He had a lot of problems, but his son Solomon reigned over a united kingdom, and it grew and it became glorious. But when he died, the tribes of Israel came to his son Rehoboam and they said, hey, here's the problem that we have here, is we love, your dad being king and we want you to be king, but here's the problem. He liked to build stuff and so he taxed us a lot. So could you please lower the taxes a bit here? And then we'll serve you forever and we want you to be our king. We want this to work out. And remember that Rehoboam, he talked to the older men and they said, yeah, you should do that. And then he talked to the younger men and they said, no, make it even worse. And he went with the younger men and he said, you know what? You thought it was bad under my dad. I'm going to make it so much worse. What was Rehoboam thinking when he did that? He was thinking, how dare they do this to me? And he was thinking how much he was going to punish them for doing that. And he thought about himself, and he thought about his grandeur, and he thought about his authority, and he thought about his prestige, and he didn't think about the fact that he and the kingdom were one. He didn't think about the fact that if he's taxing the kingdom and he's hurting the kingdom, he's hurting himself. He didn't say there's a unity between me and the people, and if they're suffering, I'm suffering. And if I increase their load, I'm increasing my own load. He didn't think like that. He said there's a division here between me and them. And they said, you know what? You're right. We're leaving. Sin is a rebellion against the unity that the covenant is built on. All sin, this is important for us to understand, all sin is a rebellion against the unity that the covenant is built on. And when we sin against God, we're sinning against the things that bring God and us together, that make us one. And that's what happens here with Cain and Abel. There's a sin, a rebellion that's going on against the things that bind them together. So second thing we want to ask ourselves is, why is faith necessary? Now, this is important because remember that in this passage, God doesn't tell him what the problem is. He just says, if you do well, won't things go well for you? God doesn't specifically tell Cain why his offering wasn't accepted. He just says that if you do that, if you change, if you do the right thing, won't things go well for you? See, what Cain is being asked to do is he's being asked to put faith in God. That if he interacts with God correctly, if he honors the unity that's between him and God with the proper sacrifice, that things will go well for him. He has to take that on faith. He doesn't know that. He might think, well, Abel's just the favorite. You just like Abel better. You just don't like me. Doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I do. I'm never going to get ahead in life. It doesn't matter how I do this. I'm never going to get ahead. Things are so unfair for me when they're fair for you. Here's the thing. Have you ever heard yourself uttering any of those words? Have you ever heard yourself in your mind thinking those things? What God is asking you to do is to have faith in him. That if you believe in him, that he is completely for you, won't you be blessed? See, that's the nature of a covenant. A covenant exists like this. There are two people. We'll call them husband and wife because there's a covenant there, right? The husband is to be totally for the wife, and the wife is to be totally for the husband. Now, what happens is, if one of them starts to suspect that the other one isn't totally for them, what takes place? Not good things, right? It's unraveling. It's unraveling. The covenant is already unraveling. When you don't think the other person is 100% for you, that's the moment when the problem starts. In fact, that's what happened with Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Remember that Adam and Eve go there, and Satan says, does God really say that you shouldn't eat from this? In fact, what God does is he knows that if you eat from this tree, that you're going to be like him. And so he plants a seed of doubt that God is completely for them. He says, no. God is not completely for you. He's actually holding back from you. That is actually the moment where the rebellion, where the sin, where the covenant starts to unravel. It's interesting that we always feel like that our rebellion against the covenant is justified by a belief in God's previous rebellion against it. It's not fair. It's not fair. I don't have to do what I'm supposed to do because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. That's always how it starts. Not very many people are like, yeah, you're doing everything for me and I'm just going to stab you in the back. Most people need the justification to say, no, you started it. The problem is that covenantal relationships are not equal, that God doesn't create blobs, but he creates bodies. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 and 16 says, rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. That passage is at the end of Paul talking about how God makes different people in different positions. And he's saying that basically everybody has these different positions, and rather than saying, well, I want that position, or why didn't God make me this, or why can't I be that, what you should understand is that everybody has their position, and everybody's position has the same goal, and that goal is to build up the body in love. If you're a teacher, your job, your goal is not to make yourself look good, it's to build up the body in love. If you're a prophet, if you're whatever position that you have, if you're a teacher, a preacher, it doesn't matter, an elder, it doesn't matter. No matter what position you have in the body, the goal is always the same, and that is to build up the body in love. Always. When you go to work, your job is to build up the company in love. When you're in your community, the job is to build up the community in love. And it doesn't matter, you can't say, well, I'm not a councilman, and that's what I really want because I would make better laws. Well, you're not. If you want to be, go get elected, but you're not right now, so don't covet their position. You notice how the fact that Abel's offering was accepted and Cain isn't is the problem here. The thing is, we do the same thing. Well, that person has this position that I want. That person is higher. They're closer to God. They're closer to power. They're closer to authority. They're closer to whatever than I am. And so therefore, no, that's not the way that it works. The way that it works is everybody's position is all pointed in the same direction. Build up the body. My brain's job is to build up the body. My hand's job is to build up the body. My foot's job is to build up the body. It doesn't matter what position it is. We get so caught up in this idea, well, I need the same amount of authority that this other person does. I need the same amount of prestige that this other person does. I need the same amount of acclaim than this person does. No, you don't. Because if that's what you're thinking about, you're not going to do anything out of a desire to build up the body in love. All you're going to do is try to focus. You're already focused on yourself. You don't need to be put in a position where you can do more damage by focusing on yourself. Think to yourself, how do I build up this community from where I am right here? And you know what will happen is as God promises this, the question is, do we believe in God or not? God says, if you're faithful with a little, I will give you more. Focus on building up the body where you're at. And then God will work out building you up into places where you can do more good. But if you're only doing something negative in the place you are now, why would God raise you up? We rebel against our place and we take God's. And this is where our relationship with God is at the heart of everything. If you say it's not fair because I don't have this amount of authority, it's not fair because I don't have this amount of power, it's not fair because I don't have this amount of prestige, your problem really isn't with your brother, it's with God. You're saying, God, you've apportioned things poorly. God, you've made a mistake here. I've deserved so much more. I deserve so much more. The question is God for us? Is he a good God? It's interesting that Adam and Eve, in asking the question if God is good, have already committed rebellion. Have you noticed that? Here's the thing. If you ask yourself, is God good? There's an element at which you've already committed the rebellion, because then it's up to you to answer whether he's good or not. It's your standard now that God's being judged by. Have you noticed that? How that works? I remember being... I think, let's see, what was I, about 20 years old. No, I was younger than that, about 19 years old, and I was working at Kmart, and I was thinking to myself what the president of Kmart, all the things that he should be doing. Yeah, I bet he really could have benefited from that wisdom that I had at that age. I was the lowest position in Kmart, and I thought, man, the guy that runs Kmart, he should be doing this, and he should be doing that, and he should be doing that. So basically, I had promoted myself to being his boss, and I was judging his performance. You know, we do that with God all the time, though, right? If God was a good God, what gives us the right to sit in judgment on God? If God exists, we just need to be quiet and listen and praise. So the problem is that God also sometimes gets in trouble by us, not for just the decisions that he makes. We not only know what decisions he should be making, but we also know what rewards we should be getting for following the rules. Cain falls into this trap. He knows how God should be rewarding him for his following the rules. As if the rules exist to be some kind of leveraging over God. God, I did this, so you must do this. This is the death of any covenant. And this is why faith is always required. Honestly, in order to be in the covenant, you have to trust God. You have to trust God. You have to say that God is good and that God rewards me in the way that I should be rewarded. His rewards to me are not only just, they're gracious, they're good, they're abundant, they're powerfully beneficial to me. That everything that comes from the hand of God is a blessing. And even times of difficulty, times of turmoil, times of pain and suffering, that God allows these things to happen out of his love for me, that God is full of love. And that's why belief in Jesus is so important. Do you believe that not only that God is good, that he is so good? Do you believe that not only does God love you, but he loves you so much that his son would come and give up his life for you? That's the kind of love that brings unity between us and God. That's the kind of love. When you believe that that is the nature, that is the depth, that is the power of God's love for you, then how hard is it to believe that the fact that your car broke down isn't really the big deal you're making it out to be? Like if you can believe that the God of the universe loves you so much, so deeply, so powerfully, that his son will give up his life to bring you back into a relationship with him, is it so hard to believe that the fact that you didn't get that raise doesn't really mean what you think it means? That really God is actually working things out for your benefit? If God will give up his son to save you, will he not order things in your world to your benefit? I mean, is it really that hard to see? That's the problem that people face. Is if you say, I can't believe in a God that is that powerfully loving toward me, then how do you fill in any of the other blanks? We need to understand finally, how is sin's desire contrary to us? We have 1 minute. For most people, sin feels finally like doing something for themselves, charting their own course, being their own captain of their own ship, and following their heart. Sin is, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be happy. I want to be happy. This is what's going to make me happy. I want to finally do something for myself. I'm throwing off all the shackles, and I'm charting my own course. The problem is that in the Bible, it just doesn't describe sin that way. It describes sin as destroying the covenant that keeps you alive. Basically, the way that the Bible describes sin is in sin, you're actually rebelling against yourself. You think you're rebelling against God, and there's a sense in which you are, but you have to understand that in sin, you're actually rebelling against yourself. You see, Cain thinks that he's mad at Abel, and he thinks that he's mad at God, and he thinks by killing his brother Abel that he's going to strike a blow, he's going to feed his emotions, he's going to follow his heart, he's going to set out his own course, and he's going to put them in their place. What he doesn't understand is that he's actually destroying himself. That's what sin is. And that's why the Bible is very clear. If you look at chapter 6 of Romans, verse 23, it says, "For the wages of sin is death." Why? You are killing yourself when you sin. You are destroying yourself when you sin. Think about it this way. Describe yourself. You say, well, I have, blue eyes, I have blonde hair, I'm tall, athletic, and handsome. Whatever it is that you would use to describe yourself. I'm charming and humble, whatever it is, put in all the words you need. So you're going to describe yourself, but if you're really describing yourself, you probably have to use some categories, some words, some covenantal language. You probably at some point have to say, I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm an American, I'm a husband, I'm an employee, I'm a homeowner, right? You're going to use some covenantal language in your description. You see, here's the thing, is that when you are in a covenant, there's a unity there, and you cannot hurt that unity without hurting yourself, obviously. If my hand had picked up a hammer and hit my face, it would be kind of painful. It'd be very strange. But it also would not be a great blow of freedom for my hand, right? It's not like my hand could celebrate and say, I've really struck a blow for liberty, right? Especially like, say it hit me in the jaw or in the teeth and knocked out the teeth and now I can't eat. It's not like my hand can really celebrate its great, taking down of the man. See, here's the problem, and any kind of rebellion, any kind of sin, and this is the problem in covenants, is that you cannot hurt the covenant without hurting yourself, because you are the covenant. Do you understand that in the Bible there are different kinds of barriers? There are shrouds and curtains, like when you went to the tabernacle, there were these shrouds and curtains. And the interesting thing is these were like mediators. These were where two things met. A curtain or a shroud is where two different things meet. So for instance, if you went into the first layer, you were in the courtyard of the tabernacle, and there's that first curtain when you go into the holy place. That curtain is actually a place where the holy place and the courtyard meet, right? That's the place where they meet. The interesting thing is a mediator in the Bible, it's a person. People are mediators. Jesus is a mediator. He's the place where God and man meet. You know that you are to be a priest. A priest is a mediator. You are actually to be a mediator. You're the place. If the Spirit of God dwells in you, then you're a mediator, right? Because inside of you is the Holy Spirit, and outside is the world. And the place where those two things meet, the mediator is you. Covenants are actually not agreements between people. Covenants are people. There is an entity that is America. You're part of it. When Benedict Arnold did what he did to hurt America, he was hurting himself, and the rest of his life bore that out. If you're in a family, you can't do anything to that family without doing it to yourself. And in the same way, in our relationship with God, what we didn't understand when we sinned in the garden is that we were actually not striking a blow against God. We were striking a blow against ourselves. We were killing ourselves. Why is it so important that we come here and we worship? Because having joy in the covenant is life. It is, it's life. The Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's our life, it's our energy. Right? When we are, John Piper says this, and I think it's a great quote. He says, God is most satisfied in us. No, wait, I messed it up. Darn it. What does he say? God is most pleased with us when we are most satisfied with him. Something like that. Basically what he's saying is, when is God happy with us? When is God pleased with us? When do we meet God's approval? When we take utter joy in him. What greater compliment could there be? What greater satisfaction could we have? What greater satisfaction could he have? You know this is true if you're a parent, right? When you're a parent, when your kid comes to you and says, thank you, Daddy, I'm so happy for what you've given me. I'm so happy for what you've done for me. Thank you so much. That is the covenant. That is the unity. That is everything wrapped up into one, and it's joy and it's life. And sin is the destruction of those things. So how do we apply what we've learned? I think the important thing to understand is we have to believe in God's goodness to us. We have to believe it. We can't get along without that belief, that fundamental belief that God is for us and who can be against us. That God would withhold no good thing from us. That every good and perfect gift comes from him. That belief, that unyielding belief in God's goodness to us is foundational. Next, we need to belong to him. We need to find ourselves in a covenant with him so that we live for him just as he lives for us. And finally, we need to be transformed into somebody who takes utter joy in who God is. Utter and complete joy. That is the only way out of the prison that we create for ourselves when we start the rebellion against God. And prison is exactly where we live as long as we're not in that covenant relationship with God.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Hey, have a great week.